Sekiro is one of the most engaging and tightly designed games I have ever played. And in today's episode, we're going to be talking about the game design techniques that actually make this possible, with how it encourages exploration, its perfected dueling system, and how Sekiro literally taught me how to read. No, seriously. So spoiler warning from this point onwards, guys, and welcome to the anatomy of Sekiro Shadows Die Twice. Our story follows Sekiro ST twice, tasked with protecting Kuro, an immortal godchild who everyone and their dads is trying to capture to get a slice of that immortality pie. We then follow Mr. Twice's journey across the ruined land of Ashina to protect Kuro's life and honour while trying his very best not to die twice, unless he wants to give everyone he's ever met fantasy cancer. So I'm going to cut to the chase here, guys, and don't worry, I will be getting into dissecting the design theory behind combat, stealth and level design, but first I want to start with this: how Sekiro taught me to read. So to begin with, what the hell am I on about? Well, I'm not talking about how the game's immaculate combat system taught me how to read enemy attacks. Well, it did, but that's irrelevant. I wanted to dissect how Sekiro literally taught me how to read. And this all begins with how From Software usually delivers their narratives. In most From Software games, its narrative is mostly delivered through notes on the ground and item descriptions, and this gives the player a lot of freedom, but also makes it very easy to miss or ignore the game's narrative through this method of delivery. Especially if you're someone like me. To preface, and this is going to get a little bit personal, but I have dyslexia and I've always struggled to read at a normal pace. Because of this, I would usually just attempt to skip optional lore. And don't get me wrong, Sekiro still communicates its story through these same methods, but now I feel the need to read. But how have the developers done this? Well, across your journey into the very heart of Ashina, you visit a vast array of locations, from ancient palaces under siege, the putrid decay of the sunken valley, to the very seat of the divine dragon himself. And just like with other FromSoft titles, Sekiro's levels are complex and non-linear, meaning the player has options in where they can go. But something that is completely new to Sekiro's levels is the use of the fabled Y-point. Now being able to jump, grapple and swim to the heights and depths of Ashina, and this verticality in its level design has just multiplied potential paths of progression to the nth degree, making it infinitely more complex for the developers to guide their players through the game's world. They're still geniusly using invisible methods to do this though, such as the use of item placements and diegetic lighting, which we covered in the anatomy of Bloodborne. But something that is completely unique to Sekiro's design is the player's need to listen. The player now has a need to listen to NPCs, recounting their tales or eavesdropping on enemies to get guidance on how to progress or where to go. And this seems obvious, right? But in other games, once the player has spoken to an NPC, they're usually given a lazy compass or map markers to hold their hand. But FromSoft just chucks them into the deep end and leaves everything up to the player, forcing them to actually listen to these stories, digesting what is being said. And this has a host of wonderful side effects. First off, and the most obvious, is that the need to pay attention pulls the player deeper into its narrative, engaging and following stories that they might not have otherwise, further increasing narrative immersion. But let's say, for instance, you couldn't give a rat's ass about the story, which is completely fair. How does Sekiro motivate you to listen? Well, eavesdropping on enemies and paying attention to NPCs' hints can lead to discovering the locations of optional items, upgrade materials and prosthetic tools in the darkest corners of Ashina's halls, transforming information you gather into tangible extrinsic rewards, further pulling unwilling players in to wanting to engage with its narrative. And this encouragement to read is also furthered by Sekiro's default language, Japanese, which makes having subtitles and needing to read a must, well, unless you speak Nipponese.
Oi! What you doing? Mate, why are you playing in Japanese, mate? You're a weeble or something. You are in England, mate. You should play in England's this?
What is your problem? The game is set in the Sengoku period of Japanese history and is made by a Japanese development team. Of course the default language is going to be in Japanese. What is your problem?
Oh, mate, you're a...
Oh my God, why are you here? Why do you exist?
Oh my god!
Why aren't you subscribed?
All of this combined covers all three motivation systems: intrinsic, extrinsic, and narrative motivation. Just by simply listening to NPCs, it encourages the player to explore the world and engage with its story naturally, without forcing anything on the player, making this the best narrative delivery in any Souls game to date, and makes me incredibly excited for Elden Ring. Because this is just perfect. This is just perfect. Oh fuck. So to contrast with how flawless and natural its narrative guidance is, the way the game teaches you to play is terrible. As a designer, you want to teach your player in a way that they don't even know it's happening, allowing for them to play at their own pace and teaching them non-intrusively. But do you know what is intrusive? Just as the boss is about to cleave you in twain as you ready to deflect their attack, the game forcibly pauses and makes you read the tutorial terms and conditions. I have a burning hatred for text boxes in game design. They just completely break immersion and the flow of gameplay. And yes, compared to other games, Sekiro's mechanics are incredibly complex and have a lot to teach its players, but having such egregious pop-ups in the middle of combat encourages the player to rush or at worst skip the tutorial entirely, trying to get back to the action and not actually absorbing how they should be playing, which leads to further mistakes and frustration. It's possible to teach your players in a more clean and organic way, say through NPC interactions throughout the game. Oh wait, they have a dedicated tutorial NPC?
Oh, hello.
What? Well, the developers were clearly nervous about how effective these pop-ups would be, as they're using multiple methods of teaching. They've got the pop-ups, the sidebar reminders, and this dedicated NPC.
Oh, hello again.
Yeah, alright mate, but they completely contradict one another. By having these tutorials pop up every 5 seconds interrupting gameplay, it discourages the player from even talking to this tutorial NPC because they assume they've already been taught everything through gameplay, but this isn't the case. These tutorials, and I'm going to be a little bit blunt here, they're just lazy design. There are better ways to teach the player, ways that don't intrude on the player's experience and teach them invisibly at their own pace. And the best example of this is Bloodborne. It's what the first half of the anatomy of Bloodborne was even about. I just think it's so weird that how FromSoft, a company so famous for being hands-off with their incredible invisible designs, have resorted to such a generic way of teaching their tutorials. Literally every single other title they have ever released has managed to avoid this problem. What's changed? But what do you think of the tutorial design in Sekiro? Was it intrusive for you? Do you think this was a result of time constraint in development? Well, comment below. I would love to hear your side of things. It's just such a shame for how perfect its combat system is when you finally understand how the game wants you to play. And many players through this teaching method don't really understand how they are meant to play the game. But once this clicks, it is the cleanest combat system I have ever seen. In every other FromSoft game, you effectively have 3 choices in combat: when to dodge, when to attack, and if you're a pimp, when to parry an enemy's attack. And parrying has always been an interesting risk-reward mechanic for the player, but Sekiro brings parrying to the forefront. Here, any and all attacks can be deflected, and enemies can do the same to you. Any attack being deflected repeatedly builds up a posture meter, and if this meter fills completely, the victor will be granted a death blow, and it's a kind of instant kill, and most kills you get will be a result of you timing your parries and your own attacks to build this posture meter, and this is so much more engaging than just dodging with iframes and chipping away at the boss's kneecaps till they drop dead. Now, each and every encounter is a duel. Paying attention to every single sword swing and always pushing forward into combat, because if you let up, the enemy's posture will slowly regenerate, losing all of that precious progress you had made. And this motivates you to stay close in a similar vein to Bloodborne's rally mechanic, and this keeps the player in the fight making interesting choices. And the player has many more choices they can make rather than just simply dodging. The player needs to counter sweeping attacks by jumping over them, or dodge into lunge attacks, which demands attention from the player as they read their opponent's vast array of moves. And Sekiro gives the player plenty of opportunity to develop mechanical mastery by pitting you against opponents that have the exact same tools as you. Souls combat has always been at its most satisfying when fighting enemies that feel as if they are on the same playing field as you. It's the one reason PvP is so engaging in these titles. And Sekiro completely perfects this formula, nothing exemplifying this more than the fight with your father. Your duel with Daddy is one of the most intense and engaging fights in the entire game. But why? Well, he literally uses the same techniques and prosthetics Sekiro has access to throughout the entire game, giving the player this subconscious knowledge on how to counter themselves. Connecting so beautifully to its narrative as Owl taught Sekiro everything he knew, and this is communicated so perfectly through gameplay. And this expands to most of the enemies in the entire game. Something else that is so intrinsically connected to the story is stealth. As Sekiro is a shinobi, skulking in the shadows of Ashina to take down unsuspecting victims. But here's the thing, stealth is shit. But wait, there's nothing strictly wrong with the design of the stealth mechanics themselves. Well, apart from the AI being completely and utterly brain dead.
Huh?
Oh shit, the main benefit to engaging with stealth is to take out a few unsuspecting enemies, and if you're lucky, find a way to avert the boss's gaze and take out one of their health bars instantly, making the fight easier. Most bosses have 2 health bars to accommodate this, but the thing is, there is no punishment if you fail. You can just slug your way up to a boss, stab him in the neck while he is surrounded by his legion of minions, and then just run away. The AI will then just jankily moonwalk back to their original positions and act as if nothing happened, allowing for you to do it all again. This just isn't rewarding at all, and watching this Michael moonwalk completely breaks immersion. It just feels like an exploit and discourages the main point of the game, which is dueling. All stealth games, in essence, are puzzle games. The player encounters a problem or a room of patrolling enemies that needs to be solved. The player is then given the freedom to experiment and explore the lateral use of the game's mechanics to solve this puzzle, figuring out what to do and how to progress. The intrinsic reward of puzzles is in having an idea of how to solve the problem and then executing it successfully. But Sekiro's stealth design doesn't focus on out-of-the-box applications of its prosthetic mechanics like its combat system does. It is only used as a cheap way to eliminate enemies or one of the boss's health bars. But what do you think? Is the stealth system in Sekiro worth it, or do you think time in development would have been better suited somewhere else, like more bosses or additional areas? Because this might be a topic for a future video centered around stealth design. So let's discuss below and we can make that episode together. For me and many others, this makes stealth feel like a menial task to be completed rather than a functional challenge or puzzle to be overcome, which contradicts its most vital asset, its boss design and how you progress. So it's safe to say that From Software games are challenging. Bosses present you with a literal wall for you to bash your head into that cannot be passed until you've proven you can progress through grit and practice, or by simply going away, grinding some enemies and leveling up. And I despise RPG leveling systems, but you'll be hearing all about that in the Anatomy of Dark Souls, where we cover its genius and subsequently stifling progression systems, so subscribe for that. But Sekiro shakes up this formula in a way that manages to retain FromSoft's famous difficulty, but now encouraging exploration and engagement with whatever systems the player personally enjoys. Because all forms of progression, be it increasing your health or damage, is tied to optional mini-bosses and challenges hidden throughout the world, finding prayer beads on the corpses of powerful enemies and hidden in the Sheena's darkest depths. If the player is struggling with a boss encounter, they're not forced to grind, but to explore. The Get Good players still have the option to beat their head against that wall until they finally overcome the boss, but tying upgrades and progression to challenges hidden in the game's world gives the player options, but it never takes them away from whatever they personally enjoy, be it exploring, fighting bosses, and as much as I don't agree with it, stealth. Progression is universal to whatever the player enjoys personally, which is just genius and keeps the player engaged and exploring the world naturally. All of this combined, the encouragement to engage with its narrative, combat and exploration comes together to create an experience where the developers clearly took a chance to experiment with this From Software formula, and I personally think they've perfected it. Almost perfected it.
Thank you so much for watching, guys. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. And the Anatomy of Dark Souls is coming, but first we're going to be taking a look at the Anatomy of It Takes Two. So stay tuned for those. And if you do enjoy this series and you want to see it continue, consider supporting its production along with this team of wonderful people on YouTube members and Patreon. Thank you so much for the support, mate. I'll see you in the next one.